I wasn't going to tell this story, but after everything I witnessed that night, I can't stay silent anymore. Maid, billionaire, and a fiancé who thought money could buy loyalty, love, and silence. What happened at that gala wasn't just a scandal. It was a moment that made 300 of New York's most powerful people go completely silent. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why some people should never underestimate the woman holding the mop. Hey, welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you belong to? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Today's story is one of the most emotional, most talked about stories I've ever told on this channel. It's about pride, about humiliation, about a secret that was buried for years, and about a woman who was mocked in front of everyone, only to prove that true worth can never be measured by a title. Stay with me till the end, because the ending of this one, you will not see it coming. New York City never sleeps, and neither did Amara Whitfield. At 28 years old, Amara worked the night shift as a housekeeper at the Ashford residence, a penthouse that occupied the top 3 floors of one of Manhattan's most expensive buildings. She wasn't born into money. She was born in a small apartment in the Bronx, raised by a single mother who cleaned office buildings until her knees gave out. Amara had grown up watching her mother come home exhausted every night, yet still humming softly while she made dinner, still finding joy in small things. That was the lesson Amara carried with her. Dignity wasn't about what you owned. It was about how you carried yourself when no one was watching. She had taken this job 8 months ago after her mother passed away, needing steady income to pay off medical bills that had piled up during her mother's final year. The penthouse belonged to Julian Ashford, a 36-year-old billionaire who had built a real estate empire from nothing but a business degree and relentless ambition. Julian wasn't like the other wealthy men Amara had heard about. He was quiet, reserved, almost distant, the kind of man who worked until midnight and barely acknowledged the staff around him, not out of arrogance, but because his mind was always somewhere else, buried in numbers and deals and responsibilities that came with running an empire. Amara had spoken to him maybe a dozen times in 8 months. Simple things. Good evening, sir. The kitchen is finished, sir. Will you need anything else tonight? He always nodded politely, sometimes offered a small thank you, and that was the extent of their relationship. She was staff. He was the owner. That was the world they lived in. But everything changed the night Amara found him sitting alone in the dark. It was nearly 11 o'clock, and she assumed the penthouse was empty. She moved through the living room, dusting the shelves, when she noticed a figure sitting on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. It was Julian. His tie was loosened. His shoulders slumped in a way she had never seen before. This billionaire, this man who commanded boardrooms and made headlines, looked broken. She almost turned away. It wasn't her place to intrude. But something in her wouldn't let her simply walk past a person in pain, regardless of his bank account. "Sir," she said gently, stepping onto the balcony. "Are you all right?" He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "Do you ever feel like everyone around you wants something from you, except for what you actually are?" Amara paused. She hadn't expected honesty like that from him. "All the time," she said softly. "But then I remind myself, the people who truly matter don't want anything from you. They just want you." Julian turned to look at her for the first time, really look at her as if seeing her. Not the uniform, not the job title, for the very first time. That was the night something shifted. Neither of them could explain it. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, human, real. Over the following weeks, small conversations turned into longer ones. Julian began finding reasons to be home earlier. He started asking about her day, her life, her mother. Amara found herself looking forward to those late-night moments, the only time Julian seemed like an actual person instead of a name in a magazine. But there was one problem neither of them spoke about. Julian was engaged. His fiancée, Victoria Sinclair, was 32 years old, elegant, sharp-tongued, and came from an equally wealthy family. Their engagement had been announced in the press 6 months ago, framed as a merger of two powerful families as much as a romance. Victoria rarely visited the penthouse. She preferred her own residence uptown. But when she did, the air in the house changed instantly. She had a way of looking at the staff, especially Amara, as if they were furniture that happened to move. "Make sure the champagne is chilled before the gala," Victoria said one evening, barely glancing in Amara's direction. "And do try to stay out of sight when my friends arrive. I don't need explanations for help." Amara said nothing. She had learned long ago that dignity sometimes meant silence, not because you had nothing to say, but because you had everything to prove, just not to people who couldn't recognize it. Little did Amara know, in exactly 2 weeks, she would be standing in the middle of the biggest gala of the year, and every single person in that room, including Victoria, would witness something none of them would ever forget. Sometimes the quietest moments hide the loudest storms. As the weeks passed, Julian and Amara's connection deepened in ways neither of them dared to name out loud. It wasn't romantic, not yet, not officially, but it was something far more dangerous: understanding. Julian had spent his entire adult life surrounded by people who valued his net worth more than his character. Investors smiled at him because of his portfolio. Socialites admired him because of his last name. Even Victoria, if Julian was being honest with himself in the quiet hours of the night, had chosen him the way someone chooses a business partner: calculated, strategic, safe. Amara never once asked him for anything. She never hinted at his wealth, never mentioned his status, never tried to impress him. She simply talked to him like a person, and for Julian, that was the rarest gift he had received in years. One evening, while helping clear dishes from a small dinner Julian had eaten alone, she noticed a photograph on his desk, an old, worn picture of a woman in a modest kitchen, laughing while flour dusted her apron. "Is that your mother?" Amara asked gently. Julian's expression softened in a way she hadn't seen before. "She passed away when I was 19. Before all of this." He gestured vaguely at the penthouse around them. "She used to say that money changes what people see when they look at you, but it never changes who you actually are underneath. I try to remember that. Some days it's harder than others." Amara smiled sadly. "My mother used to say something similar. That people who need to announce their worth with things usually don't feel very sure of it underneath." Julian looked at her for a long moment. "You never talk down about her. About Victoria." "It's not my place," Amara said simply. "That's exactly why I trust you," Julian replied. "Everyone else in my life has an opinion about everything, usually the opinion that benefits them most." Meanwhile, Victoria's behavior toward the household staff had grown increasingly cold, especially toward Amara. She couldn't explain why exactly, but something about the way Julian's eyes softened whenever Amara entered a room made her stomach twist with an emotion she refused to name. Victoria wasn't foolish. She noticed things. She noticed how Julian had started coming home earlier. She noticed how he seemed lighter, somehow more present during their infrequent dinners. She assumed it was stress relief, therapy, meditation, anything but the truth staring her in the face. The truth was simpler and more uncomfortable than she wanted to admit. Julian was falling in love with the woman who mopped his floors. Victoria began finding small ways to remind Amara of her place. A dismissive comment here. An unnecessary task assigned at the last possible moment. A subtle correction in front of guests. designed to embarrass rather than instruct. Amara endured it all with quiet grace, the same grace her mother had modeled for her throughout childhood. She needed this job. She needed the income. And more than that, she refused to let Victoria's cruelty define how she carried herself. Then came the invitation. The Ashford Foundation Gala was the social event of the year, a black-tie fundraiser attended by New York's wealthiest families, celebrities, and business titans, all gathered to celebrate charitable giving while quietly comparing gowns, jewelry, and social standing. Victoria had spent months planning every detail, determined to make her official debut as Julian's fiancée unforgettable. 3 days before the gala, Julian approached Amara in the kitchen, his expression unusually nervous for a man who negotiated multimillion-dollar deals without blinking. "I need to ask you something," he said. "And I need you to say yes before you think too hard about it." Amara raised an eyebrow. "That's a dangerous way to start a request, sir. I want you to come to the gala. As my guest." Amara nearly dropped the dish towel in her hands. "Julian, I clean your floors. I can't just." "You can," he interrupted gently. "You're the only person in my life who's ever seen me as a person instead of a paycheck. I want you there. Not as staff. As someone who matters to me." Amara's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and something she refused to call hope. "Victoria will be there." "I know," Julian said quietly. "It's time she understands something too." Amara didn't sleep that night. She stared at the ceiling of her small apartment, replaying his words over and over. She knew deep down that walking into that gala would change everything, for better or for worse. She had no idea just how true that would become. 2 days later, Victoria discovered a name added to the gala's guest list that made her blood run cold. Amara Whitfield. She stormed into Julian's office, her heels clicking against the marble floor like gunfire. "Tell me this is a mistake," she demanded, holding up the printed list. Julian didn't flinch. "It's not a mistake. You invited the maid to my gala." "Our gala," Julian corrected calmly. "And yes, I invited a friend." Victoria's laugh was sharp and humorless. "A friend? Julian, she cleans your toilets. What exactly do you think is going to happen when she walks in there in whatever she can afford, surrounded by people wearing gowns worth more than her yearly salary?" Julian's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Then maybe it's time people learn that worth isn't measured by a price tag." Victoria's eyes narrowed into something dangerous. "We'll see about that." Neither of them knew it yet, but that single conversation had set something irreversible into motion, something that would explode in front of 300 witnesses in just 48 hours. Some nights change everything. This was one of them. The Ashford Foundation Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Belmont Hotel, a space dripping in crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and the quiet murmur of old money mingling with new. Julian stood near the entrance in a tailored black tuxedo, greeting guests with the practiced charm of a man who had done this 1,000 times, though tonight his eyes kept drifting toward the door. Victoria arrived first, radiant in a custom red gown, diamonds glittering at her throat, playing the role of the perfect fiancée flawlessly for the cameras and the crowd. She smiled, she laughed, she air-kissed socialites and business partners alike, all while scanning the room for any sign of the woman she considered an embarrassment waiting to happen. Then Amara walked in. She wore a simple, elegant navy gown she had borrowed from a friend. Her hair pulled back gently, minimal jewelry, minimal makeup. She didn't need diamonds to command a room. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from surviving hardship with grace intact. Heads turned, not out of mockery but curiosity. Who was this woman standing beside Julian Ashford with such calm certainty? Victoria intercepted them before they could reach the main floor. her smile sharp as broken glass. "Well, look who decided to play dress-up tonight," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Julian, darling, I didn't realize charity extended to bringing the help as arm candy." A few nearby guests chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether to laugh or look away. Amara's face remained composed, though her chest tightened with humiliation. "Victoria, I'm here as Julian's guest." "No one will choose you over me," Victoria hissed, stepping closer, her voice dropping into something venomous despite the polite smile plastered on her face for the surrounding crowd. "You clean floors for a living. I built an empire alongside him. Do you really think you belong in a room like this?" The words landed like a slap. Amara felt every eye in her vicinity, felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her chest. For a moment, she considered simply walking out, avoiding the scene entirely. But she remembered her mother's voice, steady and sure. Dignity isn't about proving people wrong. It's about staying true to yourself when they try to make you small. "I clean floors, yes," Amara said calmly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But that's never been something I'm ashamed of. Hard work built me. I'm not sure the same can be said for everyone in this room." Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment before hardening into something colder. She turned to Julian. "Are you seriously going to let her speak to me like that?" Julian's expression, however, had shifted into something Victoria had never seen directed at her. Quiet disappointment mixed with resolve. "Victoria, I think it's time we had an honest conversation. Right here." The room around them had gone eerily quiet, guests pretending to sip their champagne while straining to listen. "Excuse me." Victoria's voice cracked with disbelief. "For months," Julian began, his voice carrying with unexpected clarity across the ballroom, "I've watched you treat the people who work for me as though their humanity is negotiable based on their income. Tonight, you humiliated a woman in front of 300 people because you felt threatened by her character, not her circumstances." "Julian, don't do this," Victoria warned through gritted teeth, panic beginning to seep into her composed mask. "I invited Amara here tonight," Julian continued, "because she's shown me more genuine kindness in 8 months than you have in the 2 years we've been together. She's never asked me for anything. She's never once made me feel like my worth was tied to my wallet." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones subtly rose, capturing the unfolding scene. Victoria's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time, in front of the exact social circle she had spent years cultivating. "You're choosing her." "The maid." Victoria's voice cracked, years of composed elegance shattering into raw, exposed panic. "I'm choosing character over cruelty," Julian said quietly. "I'm choosing someone who never once made me feel small to elevate herself." The silence in that ballroom was deafening. Amara stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the moment, unsure whether to feel vindicated or horrified at becoming the center of such a public spectacle. Then, from somewhere near the back of the room, an elderly woman began to clap. Slowly others joined, not out of mockery toward Victoria, but out of quiet respect for a truth finally being spoken aloud in a world built on pretense. Victoria, humiliated beyond recovery, turned and stormed out of the ballroom, her red gown disappearing through the grand doors as murmurs erupted across the crowd. But the night's revelations were far from over, because what Julian said next would reveal something about Amara's own past that no one, not even Amara herself, fully understood yet. Some secrets aren't meant to stay buried forever. As the ballroom buzzed with shock following Victoria's dramatic exit, an elderly man approached Julian and Amara, leaning heavily on a polished cane. His eyes fixed intently on Amara's face as though he were seeing a ghost. "Forgive me," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly. But your face. You look remarkably like someone I once knew. Rosalind Whitfield. Was she your mother? Amara's breath caught in her throat. Yes. How did you know my mother? The old man's eyes glistened with unshed tears. My name is Harold Ashford. I'm Julian's great-uncle. Decades ago, before this family built its fortune, your mother worked for my brother's household. She saved my life once, quite literally, when I fell seriously ill and no one else in that house cared enough to notice. She stayed by my bedside for 3 days straight, ensuring I survived a fever that doctors feared would take me. Julian's expression shifted from confusion to stunned realization. Uncle Harold, you never told me this story. Because I never knew what became of her, Harold said, his voice thick with emotion. I searched for her for years after I recovered, wanting to repay her kindness somehow. But by the time I was able to, she had already left that position, and I lost track of her entirely. Amara felt tears welling in her own eyes. She never spoke about working for an Ashford family. She rarely spoke about her early years at all. Harold reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an old, faded photograph. The same photograph Amara had seen on Julian's desk weeks earlier, except this one showed a much younger Rosalind standing beside a young Harold, both smiling brightly outside a modest home. She turned down a reward I tried to give her, Harold explained. She said kindness wasn't meant to be transactional. That helping someone in need was simply the right thing to do, regardless of what came afterward. The parallel wasn't lost on anyone standing nearby. Amara had unknowingly inherited not just her mother's face, but her exact philosophy on life, one that had now, decades later, connected two families in the most unexpected way imaginable. This changes things, Harold said, turning to Julian with newfound seriousness. This young woman's family saved mine, long before either of us were born into the privilege we now hold. Fate has an interesting way of bringing debts full circle. Julian looked at Amara with an expression of complete wonder. You never once used this connection. You never once tried to leverage it, even though you had every reason to. I didn't know, Amara said honestly. My mother never mentioned it. She believed some acts of kindness were meant to remain quiet. Whispers spread rapidly through the ballroom as guests began piecing together the extraordinary coincidence unfolding before them. What had begun as public humiliation had transformed into something almost mythical, a story of loyalty, legacy, and quiet virtue finally being recognized after decades of silence. Harold turned to address the room, his voice carrying surprising strength for a man his age. Tonight, I watched a young woman endure public cruelty with more grace and dignity than most people display in comfort. Then I discover she's the daughter of a woman who once saved my life without asking for anything in return. If that's not proof that true character has nothing to do with social status, I don't know what is. The applause that followed was different from before. Warmer, more genuine, filled with real admiration rather than shocked curiosity. Amara stood in the middle of it all, overwhelmed, tears finally slipping down her cheeks as decades of her mother's quiet sacrifices finally received the recognition they deserved, even if her mother wasn't alive to witness it herself. Julian gently took Amara's hand in front of everyone. I know tonight has been overwhelming, in more ways than either of us expected. But I want to be completely clear about something in front of everyone here. The room fell silent again, anticipation thick in the air. I'm not choosing Amara because of tonight's revelation about her mother, Julian said firmly. I was already falling in love with her before any of us knew this connection existed. This just confirms what I already knew in my heart. That genuine character reveals itself over time, regardless of circumstances. Amara's tears turned to quiet, overwhelmed laughter as she looked up at him. Julian, I never expected any of this. I came tonight simply because you asked me to. And that, Harold interjected with a warm smile, is precisely why you deserve to be here. But even as the ballroom celebrated this remarkable turn of events, none of them yet knew that Victoria wasn't finished. Somewhere outside that ballroom, humiliated and desperate, she was already plotting her next move, one final attempt to reclaim what she believed rightfully belonged to her. Humiliation, when left unchecked, often turns into desperation. Victoria sat in her car outside the Belmont Hotel, mascara streaked down her face, her hands trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. She had spent 2 years carefully constructing her future beside Julian Ashford, the perfect fiancé, the perfect partner, the perfect image for magazine covers and society pages. And in a matter of minutes, a maid had unraveled everything. She wasn't going to accept defeat quietly. Victoria pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in months. Her father, Richard Sinclair, a powerful investor who held significant shares in several of Julian's business ventures. If she couldn't win Julian back through emotion, she would attempt to win through leverage. "Daddy," she said, her voice cracking with practiced desperation, "Julian humiliated me tonight in front of everyone. He's choosing his maid over me. You need to do something." Richard Sinclair, however, had witnessed the same scene through a business associate's live-streamed video from the gala, and his response was far different from what Victoria expected. "Victoria," he said slowly, "I watched the footage. You mocked a woman for her profession in front of 300 witnesses, including several of my business partners. That's not humiliation Julian caused. That's consequence you created for yourself. Daddy, you can't be serious. I raised you better than this," Richard interrupted firmly. "Your mother came from nothing before she met me. She cleaned houses for 3 years to put herself through school. If she'd been in that room tonight, she would have been mortified by your behavior, not sympathetic to it." Victoria fell silent, stunned by her own father's rejection of her narrative. "I'm not going to interfere in Julian's business dealings over a personal matter you brought upon yourself," Richard continued. "In fact, I think it's time you took a step back and reflected on who you've become these past few years." The call ended, leaving Victoria alone with the crushing realization that even her own family wouldn't rally behind her this time. Her carefully built world was collapsing, piece by piece, and there was no one left to blame but herself. Meanwhile, back inside the ballroom, Julian and Amara sat together at a quiet table near the edge of the room, finally given a moment of peace amidst the evening's chaos. Harold joined them, along with a few close family friends who had witnessed the entire unfolding drama with genuine warmth rather than judgment. "I have to ask," Amara said softly, still processing everything. "What happens now? With Victoria, I mean. With the engagement?" Julian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The engagement was already fractured long before tonight, Amara. Victoria and I stayed together out of habit and family expectation more than genuine connection. Tonight simply forced both of us to confront a truth we'd been avoiding. I never wanted to be the reason for a breakup," Amara said honestly. "I never came here tonight hoping for that." "I know," Julian said gently. "And that's exactly why none of this feels wrong. You never once tried to take anything from her. She lost this on her own, through her own actions." Harold nodded approvingly. "Character reveals itself in moments of pressure, my dear. Tonight, we witnessed 2 very different types of character on full display." As the gala wound down and guests began departing, whispers of the night's dramatic events spread rapidly through New York social circles, eventually finding their way into gossip columns and social media threads by morning. Some criticized Julian for creating a public spectacle. Others praised Amara for her composed dignity throughout an incredibly humiliating ordeal. But the overwhelming sentiment, shared by thousands online within hours, centered on one simple truth. True character cannot be bought, sold, or faked, no matter how much money surrounds it. Victoria, upon seeing the online reaction the following morning, realized with devastating clarity that her public image, the very thing she had prioritized above genuine connection, had ultimately become her downfall. She had spent years perfecting appearances while neglecting the substance beneath them, and now the world was watching that hollow foundation crumble in real time. For Amara and Julian, however, the following weeks brought something neither had experienced in years: genuine peace. Julian began spending less time obsessing over business deals and more time nurturing the connection that had quietly bloomed between them over months of late-night conversations. Amara, meanwhile, found herself gradually stepping into a world she never imagined belonging to, though she never lost sight of the values her mother had instilled in her from childhood. But their story wasn't quite finished yet, because in 3 weeks' time, Julian would make a decision that would honor Amara's mother's memory in a way none of them could have anticipated. Sometimes the most beautiful endings come from honoring the past. 3 weeks after the gala, Julian invited Amara to a small, private gathering at the Ashford family estate just outside the city. She assumed it would simply be a quiet dinner with Harold and a few close family members, a chance to decompress after weeks of media attention following the viral Gala incident. Instead, she arrived to find something far more meaningful waiting for her. Harold stood on the estate's front steps, holding a small wooden box that looked decades old. Beside him stood Julian, dressed casually, his expression warm and unusually emotional for a man typically composed in business settings. "Amara," Harold began, "for years I searched for a way to properly thank your mother for what she did for me. When I lost track of her, I never got that chance. But fate, it seems, has finally given me a second opportunity." He opened the wooden box, revealing an old, handwritten letter along with a small, weathered photograph of Rosalind as a young woman. "This letter was written by my brother, Julian's grandfather, shortly before he passed away. He always regretted how our family treated the household staff during those years, treating kindness as an inconvenience rather than a virtue. In this letter, he expressed hope that someday, our family would find a way to repay the debt your mother's compassion created." Amara's hands trembled as she accepted the box, tears welling in her eyes as she read her mother's name written in unfamiliar handwriting from decades ago. "Julian and I have discussed this at length," Harold continued, "and we've decided the best way to honor your mother's legacy isn't through money or gestures, but through action that reflects her own values." Julian stepped forward, taking Amara's hand gently. "We're establishing the Rosalind Whitfield Foundation, dedicated to providing healthcare assistance and educational scholarships for domestic workers and their families across the country. People like your mother, who spent their entire lives caring for others while receiving little recognition in return." Amara's breath caught in her throat, overwhelmed by emotion. "Julian, this is beyond anything I could have imagined. Your mother saved my great-uncle's life without ever asking for anything in return," Julian said softly. "The least our family can do is ensure her name continues helping others for generations to come." As the foundation's launch was announced publicly weeks later, the story of Amara's journey, from an overlooked maid mocked at a gala to becoming the inspiration behind a nationwide charitable foundation, captured the hearts of millions across the country. News outlets picked up the story, transforming what began as a moment of public humiliation into a powerful narrative about dignity, legacy, and the quiet strength of everyday people whose contributions often go unrecognized. Victoria, watching the foundation's launch coverage from a distance, finally understood the depth of what she had lost that night. Not merely a wealthy fiancé, but an opportunity to witness genuine goodness firsthand, an opportunity she had allowed her own insecurities to destroy. As for Amara and Julian, their relationship continued to grow, built not on status or wealth, but on the foundation of mutual respect and shared values that had first connected them during quiet, unremarkable evenings in a penthouse most people would never see beyond its polished surface. Months later, at a small, intimate ceremony attended by close friends and family rather than 300 socialites, Julian and Amara exchanged vows in the same estate garden where Harold had first shared her mother's story. Amara wore a simple white dress, far from designer extravagance, yet she had never looked more radiant in her life. During his vows, Julian spoke words that would later be shared thousands of times across social media. "I didn't fall in love with a title, a bank account, or a social status. I fell in love with a woman who taught me that true worth is measured by kindness, integrity, and grace under pressure. The same lessons her mother instilled in her decades before we ever met." And so, the story of the maid mocked at a billionaire's gala transformed into something far greater than anyone could have predicted. A legacy of compassion spanning 2 generations, ultimately proving that true character always finds its way to recognition, no matter how long it takes. The moral of this story is simple, yet profound. Never judge someone's worth by their job title, their bank account, or their social status. The person serving you today might carry more grace, more integrity, and more quiet strength than anyone in the room realizes. Kindness always finds its way back to those who give it freely, sometimes in ways we could never imagine. If this story touched your heart today, please take a moment to hit that like button. It truly helps this channel grow and reach more people who need these stories. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we bring you emotional, heartwarming stories just like this one every single week. And if someone in your life needs a reminder that kindness and dignity always matter, please share this video with them. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.